Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
We can say, having arrived yesterday, that you are a very hospitable city and people. So thank you to our hosts. As one of my teachers often asks before class, she says, is there anything that you would like me to cover today? So in the way of making this a little bit more interactive, we certainly have a formal presentation. We're going to go through all of that. But is there anything that all of you would like us to touch on during our 30 or 40 minutes together? There'll certainly be plenty of time for questions afterwards. So, any questions, any requests before we begin? Once, going twice, going 3 times. Good thing that we have a presentation already to make. So, I'm Scott, and this is my dear colleague, Eamonn.
Hello. How many people in the audience are designers or UX folks or developers? Is it designers first?
All right. Now we have participation.
And then developers? Okay, great. So our talk is pretty much design focused, but also product focused, I think. So you'll get something out of it probably in the end.
Yeah. Just very quickly on background, Eamonn is a designer. I'm the product lead for USA Today. I also work with our partners. I do business development. I work across all of our platforms, including print and some of the events that we do. So between the two of us, we touch many different parts of our business, and I don't want to make any assumptions. So I'll also say, as prelude, that USA Today is a part of Gannett. Gannett is the largest news company in the United States. We presently publish USA Today, plus over 90 local newspapers and markets around the country, and we just made another acquisition, and we will soon be over 100 local newspapers plus USA Today, plus a newspaper group in Great Britain, which includes the oldest continually published newspaper in the world. I learned recently they began publishing in the 1600s. So the things that we're going to talk about are problems and opportunities we solve in the context of all of that. And one last thing I'll say on background, and we'll say a little bit more about this as we continue with our presentation. We have over 3,000 journalists, and so that makes us certainly the largest news organization in the United States, but you can imagine that presents lots of opportunities and complications as well. So with that, Eamonn?
So back in 2012, when I first started at USA Today, this is what our website looked like. It's pretty hideous, but it served its purpose. It's a fairly basic news website. As Scott said, we had 3,000 journalists within the organization, all inputting content into our back-end CMS system to be surfaced on this website. In 2012, we went through a rebrand. We worked with Wolf Olins and Fantasy Interactive to not only rebrand the company, but rebrand our actual visual identity and then also our website. This is one version of what we kind of redesigned back in 2012. This is our homepage. And we're showing you this not necessarily as the focus of our talk, but as sort of to establish the beginning of the design process and where we started thinking about how to present content in a sort of effective user experience and visually appealing manner throughout our website. So this was the start of our design, like redesign back in 2012.
Can we go back 1,
Yep.
2? This is going to be a little bit like an improv session or a little bit like jazz, so it will not be hugely formal. So you'll see that there are quite a few things that are similar between this and the new page, and that's because at the beginning of the process, internally and with Fantasy Interactive and with Wolf Olin, we identified a few things that were still important to us and priorities for the redesign. One of them was we were not going to change what we do, although we do many things as a business, but we are thought of first and foremost as a news source, and so we were going to stick to our guns. The second thing is we would need ways to package the news that served our customers and our journalists and their obligations to report. We wanted to continue to emphasize different media types, especially video, for example. And we also have a business to run, and we are advertiser supported, although our local sites also have paywalls or meters. If I use sort of any terms of art or things which are kind of idiomatic and not clear, please by all means ask for clarification. But what that means is a percentage of our traffic to our local sites is services people who pay for that content. So we also needed to focus on our advertising models as a part of this redesign, and we'll talk about that a little more as well.
As Scott mentioned, we have over 100 different news organizations within Gannett. So a lot of what we work on, what we design, actually scales down to those other newspapers. So the redesign of USA Today also affected those 100 plus other newspapers. So they got new websites, they got new mobile apps and everything. Anytime we update our products, those updates also sort of scale down to the smaller newspapers and the larger newspapers that work within our system. So this is back in 2012, just to sort of set the standard of our design. Wanted to show you the homepage redesign. But really what we want to focus on today is our mobile redesign. We're currently going through a pretty heavy redesign or refresh of all of our mobile products. If you look at all of our mobile products today, they all look a little bit different. And I think that's due to, I think back in 2012, 2013, we made a decision to kind of sometimes stick to the platform-specific design. So iPhone tended to look a lot like other iPhone designs. iPad looked like other newspaper app designs. Android followed very standard Android design styles. But it was all sort of this fractured experience. Everything was different. So if you went from an iPhone to an Android tablet later in the day, everything looked very different. It felt different, it acted different, there was different navigation structure, there was just a whole different experience for the user. So as part of the past year or so, the goal for our design team was to bring everything back on a unified platform. And I think from a editorial or journalistics perspective, it all made sense as well. So if you decided as a journalist to input certain content types in an article for the iPhone app, it would also appear on our Android app or our tablet app or our website. It would all be sort of tied in together.
Can I comment on that for a sec? So one, a really coherent brand identity and experience, a really passionate commitment to tell a complete story regardless of the platform that people were connecting with us on. And what's I think is really kind of interesting about this, have Facebook Instant Articles deployed in Europe yet? No? No? Does anyone? Okay. How many people raise your hand if you know what Facebook Instant Articles are? I'm determined to make this interactive. Thank you. So basically, Facebook Instant Articles are news stories that render natively inside Facebook's applications. This is not without a little bit of controversy in the United States, and they are rolling it out in other countries. There's some people who feel that Facebook is doing this as a way to co-opt publishers into publishing their content on Facebook. Facebook will say that by rendering the stories natively in the applications, they're able to deliver the content much more quickly, which is absolutely true. As many US publishers, we have already and for some time been publishing promotions for our content in Facebook, and our point of view on this is that we want to meet our customers wherever they are. And so as a Facebook publishing partner within Instant Articles, we want that experience to be brand consistent as well. And here's the point that I really want to make about this. Facebook insisted that any story that we publish as a part of Instant Articles be 100% matched to the version of the story that we published on our site, so there could be no shortcuts. So as a business imperative, we had to do it, but as storytellers, we wanted to do it anyway, so it could be consistent, so nothing would be left out.
Yeah, that's probably the the key factor in this talk is we're trying to bring consistency to all of our products at USA Today. So another big part of this, what's going on right now, is as far as the inconsistency, I think is as a design team, we originally were very fractured. We hired one person to work on iPad, another person to work on iPhone, another team to work on Android, and we weren't really sort of probably communicating as best as we could to talk about, this is what we're doing on iPhone, we should do it in Android phone, and this is what we're doing on iPad, we should do it on desktop. And this was 3 years ago, so it's changed a lot since then. The goal of this redesign and sort of even the restructuring of our design team was to bring that constant communication and consistency across all of our products. So the fractured team actually created fractured experiences, I believe, in our current product system. This is a sneak peek of what we're sort of going to launch end of the year, early next year. This is iPad. This is the start of the redesign for our iPad, so that we have a very large top carousel for our top 5 stories. We have sort of a snap grid to kind of guide users through the fronts of our news apps. We wanted users to be focused one screen at a time, but also build hierarchy within those screens. So this is all sort of a snap, sort of, if you think of a rail car snap grid. And we tried to distinguish visual hierarchy on each grid by having larger images to be sort of the top story of that section. We have different modules. We have throughout the front, there's probably 40 stories. So you get a sort of this mixed grid approach, one screen at a time. So you're actually establishing one view at a time for a user.
Can you go back one more, please, Eamonn, too?
Yeah.
So we talked about advertising. I feel like some of this may actually be a tutorial for those of you who are doing business with customers in the US. So I'm going to ask another question, because I'm learning a lot as we go along. International Advertising Bureau, IAB, familiar or not familiar? IAB standard ad sizes? Right, okay, so there's this organization in the US, I don't know if they are global. Are they global, do you know? Yeah, right. So many of our ad formats are IAB standard, not all. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. We had an IAB standard unit, have an IAB standard unit in our present iPad implementation, but it's not one that's especially desirable. There's not much of a market for it, and because we're an ad-supported business, one of the things that Eamonn and his team did was incorporate the ubiquitous 300 by 250 ad onto the homepage of the tablet. So these things make a difference. So just because you're doing the thing that's standard does not necessarily mean you're doing the standard thing that your customers actually want to buy. So another important change which made our advertising sales team happy.
Just a quick note. So at the top here we have this sort of top story carousel, and that was kind of a stab in the dark on our part to say, like, this is a presentation of content. It's not 100 links in your face on the front page. It's not everything above the fold all at once. We wanted to have sort of this focused UI around how to get users through content. And it was questionable at first, because typically carousels, especially on websites, are kind of the death of content, whether it's slide 2, 3, or 4, or 5. But we actually tested this several times in different iterations of design, and each design actually tested really well. About 95% of all users were able to establish that this top carousel was our top 5 stories. It built hierarchy into the page, and they immediately understood it, that this is where I go for the most recent news, but also they interacted with it very quickly, almost instantly. They opened the app and started swiping left and right, and then up and down. So they understood that this is where content lived. This is how to surface it, and this is how to discover it. So it was questionable at first, and I think Scott could probably tell you that it was really questionable for the editorial staff. They were really worried about it, but it actually tested really well.
They continue to be worried about it. So sometimes design pushes editorial. Sometimes editorial pushes design. In this case, they're still uncomfortable, and we'll see what happens when we deploy. But Eamonn is absolutely right. Like, the design team made the best possible case for addressing editorials' concerns and making the business and the design case for this. So I'm excited to see how we do, and if we, is this being taped? This is being taped. So if so if we screw this up, I guess, you know, we back it out. But we're going to try something new.
Do you tailor-made the content based on user preferences, or everybody's getting the same page?
That's a great question. So the question is everyone getting the same experience, or is it personalized? In this next release, everyone gets the same experience. Do we have Akira?
We don't, no.
Right. We have a new prototype that we're working on that is personalized, and we're rebuilding our entire back-end architecture to support a unique experience for every customer. And that also is not without some controversy as well within the newsroom, because how do you balance personalization with reporting on the news? And I would love to, if I don't come back to that, will you remind me at the end, because I want to talk about a particular weekend in the news a few weeks ago and why this is a really critical thing.
Yeah, so a big thing throughout this entire redesign was keeping that in mind, the fact that we have this other product, we call it Akira. It's
Code name Akira.
It's personalized, customized content. So you can go into the app and you can tell it, you know, I like sports, I like news about business, etc. So you're actually customizing your news, and it's surfacing content that's tailored towards you. The whole idea behind this design was to be ready for that, keeping in mind that we have this sort of sandbox playground of this app Akira on the left-hand side, and then when it launches or when it becomes proven in the market, we'll bring some of those features over to our design in USA Today. So that was something to keep in mind as we were going through the process, to be very flexible within our design. Currently, I don't know if you saw our iPad in the back here, it was really difficult to incorporate any sort of new features into the design because it was very sort of rigid and structured around a certain grid and a certain layout type. That made it almost impossible to incorporate anything else into the design, whereas our new structure with sort of snap grid fronts and modular, almost like Lego system of content, it allows us to be very flexible in incorporating new design elements, new features. This is an article page within the app. We've probably said it like 3 times already, but visual storytelling is very big for USA Today, so we wanted to incorporate, you know, large images, things like videos and video playlists embedded inline in our article pages, interactive galleries, so inline you can actually interact with a photo gallery or even video playlists, and then also incorporating things like social media. It seems fairly basic nowadays to incorporate tweets and Facebook and Vimeo and all kinds of social embeds, but it actually turned out to be quite a challenge for our mobile staff to be able to do this, to implement it. We created our own sort of O-embed structure around being able to embed anything we really want at this point. So do you want to talk a bit about O-embeds?
Sure. So if you're going to tell a complete story these days, you want to be able to include media that comes from other places. For those of you who create responsive websites or mobile websites, you know that you can embed stuff with an iframe, but that gets dropped from native applications, at least in my experience it does. So our development and design teams had to work together to come up with a new service that would allow us to embed a set of embed types, and we continue to add to that in a way that they would render on all platforms, right? This consistency of experience across all platforms. Some things would be incomplete without the tweet if you're writing off of it, or the YouTube or the Vimeo video. So we continue to add to that set all the time, and right now it includes things like Twitter, Instagram, Vimeo, YouTube, some other video players, and some other social services.
Yeah, I mean, the system we created can actually handle any HTML embed type, but we styled the major ones that Scott mentioned, so the YouTubes, the Vimeos, the Facebook, Twitter. We made sure that the top, 10 social feeds were actually looking and performing well inside the app.
Do you have any reinvent
Which are the most popular among the editorial staff?
With the modules, yeah.
Right.
Different services.
Right. So, to clarify, the question is, among the editorial staff, the folks who are making the content, which embed types are the most popular?
Yeah.
It's probably what you would expect to be the most popular. Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube are the top three, but by all means, not the only ones.
Is there any like feedback loop embedded, or is that just by how do you measure that interaction?
So how do we measure the interaction with the editorial team? Is the question we ask, right? We don't have. There's no system that tells us how many of them each embed type have been used.
So this is the phone version of that consistent user experience, brand experience, visual experience inside of our apps. We basically scaled from iPad to iPhone to create this sort of universal app experience. Again, you have that top carousel. This is something we actually tested after several iterations. We had, at first we had a square crop image on the iPhone app. That was to accommodate editorials needs. Typically a tall vertical crop image is kind of hard to work with from a news perspective. Imagine a photo of Scott and I in a vertical crop. Scott would be cut out because it's just me in that crop.
As it should be, I might add.
So it presents a level of difficulty. So we started with a square so that we could both fit in that crop and be presented on the front page. But it felt a little bland when we looked at it from a visual perspective, and we wanted to have sort of that sizzle in the app, something that looked very sort of modern and up to date. So we went with this taller crop, and we made sure with our editorial staff that they were cool with that they could actually work with that crop. And
They're sort of about that cool with it, by the way. So, but they've agreed.
But in the end, they agreed because it was sort of this enhanced experience inside that top carousel. So that carried that level of consistency from iPad down to iPhone, and as we get further on, you'll see that it's also carried over to Android phone, Windows 10, really any digital product that is a mobile device will have this design. Again, sort of 300 by 250 advertising, different modules. On phone, it's a lot easier to kind of design for because on tablet, you have to think about screen space and all the different sort of viewing options in one screen. On phone, it's sort of one directional, very easy to kind of design and navigate through. So,
will you talk about the change that you made after user testing with the first card on the first image, and also speak briefly to the design treatment for the circles and how that connects back to the brand?
Yeah, definitely. The original, or the second design we had for this carousel, where it was a tall image, originally we had I think it's a 320 by 50 ad at the bottom here. So it was basically a strip along the bottom that was an advertisement, which is a standard IAB size. But it didn't peek content in from the bottom. So we found that users actually weren't realizing right away that they could scroll down to see more content. And originally the carousel didn't have these pagination dots, which is fairly standard for iOS and mobile design. We had a count in the top right corner, like 1 of 5 stories, and users missed that completely. They didn't see the 1 of 5. They didn't really understand that that there was more content below. It just felt like a very sort of static design to them, and they didn't really quite understand it right away. Some users actually did scroll past the ad, but they didn't realize that there was a carousel up top. So they go all the way down to the bottom and then come back up and then maybe discover the top carousel. So that's where it came into question as whether editorial should program actual top stories in that space, or maybe just sort of 5 evergreen stories that can get throughout the day without really worrying about it, and have the 6th slot down below be the number 2 instead of number 6.
Right.
So after user testing and realizing that people didn't understand the carousel count method we created, and they didn't really understand the ad at the bottom versus a content peak, we just updated. We decided to kind of strip the ad out of the first screen and put it on the second screen, and go with more of a standard carousel pagination display.
How much time elapsed between your thought that this could be a possibility, user testing and the change?
It was about a day, I think. So we yeah, we designed it. We created a prototype very quickly, and yeah.
So the question is, repeat the question.
He asked how did our sales team react to ad on the first screen versus the second screen?
Yeah.
It was not that great. Yeah, I think they were questioning it at first, and they did sort of revenue models, and they also worked very quickly to try to understand what the impact of that would be. We found out that really we have data that shows that like 98% of our users always scroll, constantly scroll right away when they get into an ad, whether it's left, right, up, and down. So they were really concerned about viewability of that ad. And really, in the end, it turned out okay because we had a larger ad on the second screen versus a smaller ad on the first screen that people were going to see. They weren't going to see it as soon as they open the app, but they will see it 2 seconds later. So they ended up not really worrying about it too much, and they actually agreed to it.
Question?
Question, yeah. Have you considered using animations to hint what's, layers of information? And for example, the ad is high when you scroll down. When you start scrolling up, it will show something like that.
The elevator style ad. Why don't you answer the first question, then I'll speak to the elevator thing.
So a big part of this whole redesign effort is we've actually dedicated one of our senior designers to be more of a UI transition designer. So he's focused 100% around how animations and transitions and things of that nature can enhance the experience in the app. As far as the ad perspective, I mean, we have that currently, the pinned 300 by 250.
Yeah, but mostly we're trying to get away from it. I call it the odious elevator unit. Because this is my point of view, and we actually did a test, interesting. You all know about Taboola? Yeah? No? All right, I'll come back to that. But we've done some user testing, and one, and this is my personal point of view, and I feel really passionate about it, we just need to get out of people's way when they're trying to read our content, and anything that takes up screen real estate is, I believe, a kind of disservice to the customer. And so we're trying to get away from pinned ads and the sorts of things that creep up depending on where you are, kind of whether you're scrolling up or down. And if you went to our mobile website, you might see some traditional banner ads that pin to the bottom, but mostly we're trying to get away from that.
I think another big part of that is we're starting to do more of native advertising, so things that are sort of advertorial, where it looks like native content, but it's actually an advertisement piece from advertisers. So 1 minute on the circle motif too. Would you mind? So the circle images. The USA Today brand is a point. We call it the point. It's a big circle, blue circle, red circle. So we wanted to incorporate that into more than just the logo at the top of the page. And we actually incorporated it into the actual image crop for any of the secondary cards on the page. And it was quite a challenge for, I think, a lot of our editorial staff to understand. This is just sort of a square crop with masked out corners on it. But we wanted to bring that brand element into every card throughout the front of whether it's tablet or phone, or it may even get to desktop sooner or later. But the idea was to incorporate that brand element into every story so that it's a part of our visual storytelling. We've actually scaled back a bit on the color overlay on it, but it will be that circle crop throughout the fronts of the products. And really, it helps sort of visually distinguish us from any other app out there. Everybody uses square crops or 4:3 or 16:9, and it looks very different than anyone else out there. So when you hold up our app compared to New York Times or Wall Street Journal or anyone out
Post,
there,
BuzzFeed,
it's very different.
CNN.
It's sort of a distinguishing brand element.
right? So there are a couple themes here, a few themes here, right? Unity of design, consistent storytelling. this tension between advertising and design, doing the right thing by all of our customers, right? Our customers are the folks who come to us every day for the news, and our customers are also our advertising partners. And this tension, largely healthy between design and editorial, because it is this combined effort of product and content that really allows us all to do our jobs. So this is I think, a really vibrant and valuable part of the culture that we're creating at our company, and hopefully it's actually even more integrated it's integrated into our process as well. So it's a kind of this constant negotiation, and like all good negotiations, often all parties are not entirely satisfied with the resolution. Back to you.
Again, the navigation experience in our current products, the ones that are out there now, they're all different, from iPhone to iPad to Android phone to Windows 10. So one major overhaul was sort of bringing that all under one roof and giving users exactly the same navigation from desktop to native mobile apps. So this is the iPhone and then the Android navigation. One thing that we did learn through user testing is that typically Android users like to stick to that sort of the convention of Android, where it's a full menu with drop-downs inside one place. And then we also learned that on iOS that users actually preferred separate sort of primary and secondary navigation elements, sort of distinguished from each other. So on the left we have iOS with sort of our top sections, and then subsections are listed in page on iOS, whereas on Android they're actually all in one menu. And I think that just plays into the user convention of Android versus iOS. So it was just something we kind of played off of to solidify our navigation structure throughout the different platforms. The same design is being carried throughout all of our products, so including Apple Watch, Moto 360, Windows 10. We designed Apple Watch back in, I guess it was February of last year?
Yeah, the product launch, whenever that was.
And we were kind of brought in on the ground level with Apple wanting us to create an app for Apple Watch prior to the release of the watch. So that posed quite a challenge from a design perspective, creating an app for a product that doesn't exist yet, or we didn't have in our hands to work with or actually use as we're designing. So there's a whole array of challenges that came with that. There's a whole other talk that we could give around it, but essentially we pretty much had to trust our gut as we were designing for Apple Watch and the experience we wanted to have come across in that. And this is one of the first products that released that was sort of in that new design style that we were going for. This is just an example of Windows 10. Also, this was a very quick turnaround that we created. This is one of the first products that launched that had this new universal brand experience, user experience inside of our apps. This launched in time for the
Windows 10 launch.
Windows 10 launch, which was, I don't know, it's not a keynote, they call it something else, the Build conference.
Right.
It was featured at Build, but the CEO of Microsoft showed it on stage. It was great. But this was one of the first apps that actually carried that universal sort of experience that we wanted to have come across in our apps. So it was a great test case to see how successful it was there.
Will you also just kind of comment on Marianne and what she had to work with on this? Because it's analogous to the watch thing in a way.
Right. So yeah, we have a designer on our team named Marianne Epstein. She basically had about 2 or 3 weeks to kind of crank this out, and we were already working on our mobile refresh design. So we had our iPad design that was already complete pretty much, which you saw earlier. And this is where we really solidified the idea of hey, let's carry this design and this experience cross-platform. So she actually took our iPad design and sort of worked within the conventions of Windows to adapt that design to the Windows 10 platform. And sort of the unique thing about designing for Windows 10, it's basically a responsive website, the way you design it for a native experience. So what you design on tablet, you can scale down to half screen, to a third screen, to phone, and then also to Xbox, desktop computer. So it's like you have to really think through this responsive platform as you're designing for Windows 10.
And there was almost no documentation and certainly no visual design guidelines for Marianne when she did this. So because we're big, we are sometimes, but not always, invited to be launch partners around these things. And sometimes our partners can give us a lot to work with and sometimes not so much. So this is a particularly bang-up job of not having a lot to work with and to Marianne's credit, producing something I think quite beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, as she was working on this project, it felt like we were helping them establish their UX principles for their software, and rather than them telling us, hey, you should do this because Windows 10 does this. They were actually very open and flexible and almost understanding of what we wanted to do, and then incorporating that into their overall OS system for Windows 10, which was pretty cool to see. Like, we had that influence on the actual operating level of Windows. And then this is just an example of the same design scaled down to Android phone and Android tablet. Again, very consistent, very similar to the Apple experience, but still, we try to maintain the material design style and experience on the Android side. If this were an active screen, if you scrolled up, you'd get that sort of colored header banner, and navigation structure is very Android-esque. So we are keeping a consistent experience with respect to each different platform's OS level navigation and things like that. And then, before we even started this project, we really wanted to get an understanding of who our users were and what they wanted, and what they actually wanted to see inside of a news app. So we have a fairly large user base, and we have probably close to 10 million page views a day in each product, the popular products at least.
Just for context, we have over 100 million visitors a month, over 100 million visitors a month, and over 1 billion page views across all of our products in a month. That's just USA Today. That's not all of the local stuff in addition. So, how many stories do we publish a day? On USA Today, we publish several hundred stories a day across the network. It's many, many more. Some of that content is shared. Some of it is published only locally. We'll come back to that in just a sec, but several hundred pieces a day for USA Today exclusively.
But the great thing about having that large user base is we can actually do baseline testing on our current products to get an understanding from users what they want, what they expect, what we're doing right currently, what we're not doing right, and how we can improve it. So we did a ton of baseline user testing ahead of the redesign to understand exactly what our users wanted. We found that a lot of users don't necessarily want to sort of swipe blindly through content. So when they open an article, we have a functionality where you can actually swipe through from story to story. Users weren't exactly using that. They didn't really quite understand why they would use that, because they're very particular about the articles they read or the videos they watch. So a lot of our users were going to article and then going back to front, and then grazing front and scanning headlines and then navigating that way instead of sort of swiping through content. So that was a big part in the redesign, was to kind of create this viewable and scannable headline grid that a user could kind of get through very easily and very cleanly without sort of corrupting their experience. And then also we, throughout the process of design, we were prototyping and testing and iterating. We probably went through 5 or 6 rounds of testing to really nail down exactly what we wanted iPad to do and iPhone to do, and then also Android and phone and tablet. And then, do you want to talk about the content management system?
Sure. So at the same time we redesigned all of our platforms, we rebuilt a CMS. The company operated more as a holding company 3 years ago, and so we had multiple CMSs, multiple ad servers, multiple partnerships for various kinds of services. And so while USA Today was the first of the company's businesses to launch with new templates and products. It was also the first to migrate to a new CMS. So what this means is that all 3,000 of our domestic journalists can operate as one newsroom. And it makes it very easy for us to share content from one site to another. We talk a lot about local to national and national to local. What that means is many national stories in the United States may originate in a particular market. Sometimes the story is horrific, like the shootings in California. This week we have a number of properties in California, and so they could report on the ground. That is also a bigger national story. Sometimes, and this comes back to the content question that I think someone asked, sometimes there's a story of national import that has a local angle, and so someone can take the same story in our CMS and localize it for their local site. And there are a bunch of things that happen so that search rank is preserved and that sort of thing if an exact replica of the story is republished. But this is very much the way that we do business, and increasingly do business as one newsroom, obviously with people in each community who are really attuned to what matters in that community, but also, and this is a cultural change, this is a kind of an intellectual change as well, thinking about how what they do can also be a part of kind of the larger initiative. So this one newsroom thing is really a big deal for us, and obviously, because economics matter, it allows us to be more efficient in regards to some of the things that we do, because the same thing is increasingly tackled in a coordinated way rather than multiple people doing different versions of the same story.
And this kind of plays into what we think about when we design for these products as well. So not only are we designing for USA Today, but we're designing for these 100+ other news outlets throughout the country, throughout the UK. You know, sometimes a small newspaper in Wisconsin in the United States doesn't have the same capabilities as USA Today. They might not have photographers or videographers or even people to change the content on the iPad front. So that's things we have to keep in mind as we're designing. How does this scale down to you know, a large news organization to a news company of 5 people instead of 200 people? So that was something that we had to take into account as we designed. That played into the fact that we designed a very sort of flexible design on the fronts that can be changed out. That top carousel could actually go static and be, you know, 3 stories on a front instead of the 5 rotating carousel items.
Or if you don't have a kick-ass picture, it will work just with a headline.
Right. And then advertising, a very big part of what we design around to kind of not disrupt our users, but also we have to pay the bills and it's a business. So a big part of what we talked about earlier was the IAB standards that we kind of work into our products, and that it always influences our design, because you have to kind of build your grid around that, your structure around these ads. But also what we're doing is trying to innovate in this space. What we call the gravity ad is a full screen video background experience, interactive elements overlaid on top of that. It's a takeover experience for our mobile products, for our desktop products, and it's just something that's a little bit more, I suppose, interactive rather than a poster ad on a front or on a website.
So I'd like to comment on this as well, because it illustrates how we iterate, and how sometimes we try something new and it doesn't work so well, and we kind of, you know, we have to move on. I said that when we did the redesign, we were obviously doubling down on news. We had to think about how we were going to package the news. We wanted to emphasize video. You saw some of how we integrate the video player. A lot of that stuff was already familiar to users, and we just rethought how we presented it and promoted it. Another thing that we took a stab at that we've just backed off of was user-generated content. We thought we would create our own platform for that. A couple weeks ago, we made a decision to sunset that product and focus purely on social channels, right? Because we've been overtaken by the marketplace. People are already submitting amazing photos and videos to Vine and YouTube and Instagram and Twitter and other places, although we had probably 50,000 very high-quality submissions over the time we had the product. There's sort of no need for us to support that from a resource and technical perspective, so we're backing off of that and just relying on the social channels where people already publish their content for that media. But another thing that we tried and we thought we would reinvent was sort of full canvas advertising. And we developed all of these new sort of non-standard ad types, and they were beautiful. And some advertisers really dug them, but they were special and they required extra work and extra expense, and they didn't scale particularly well for the advertisers. And so only certain kinds of advertisers would kind of go down that road with us. However, this Gravity unit was a new attempt, and I think it's been about a year and a half since we debuted it, at making full canvas advertising. And what's clever about this, and credit goes to our colleague Steve Alberg and his team, is that if you have a YouTube video, you can create one of these things in less than 60 seconds. So super efficient to create this unit. Chances are you already have video media, and so we can turn it around really quickly and really economically. This is not meant to be a place, although sometimes we fall short of that, where someone runs their like 15-second or 30-second television spot, because that kind of sucks. But if what you're doing is promoting a new movie or a new television show or something else that you've made a really clever piece of video around, this is a full canvas unit that we can make for you that is like consistent with everything else that you're doing. So here we succeeded, whereas before we fell short of our goals, right? So like, try new things, ask your sales team to go out and sell them, ask your editorial team to go out and to work with what you've done, but sometimes you kind of got to admit that it didn't work out as you wanted and move on.
So a big part of our approach is not really considering our users to be people who just create page views and numbers to us. From a design perspective, we're constantly looking into who our customers are, whether it's feedback on the iOS App Store or the Google Play Store. We actually respond to almost all of all the questions and inquiries in the Google Play Store. Our product managers do that, and they refer back any questions or comments or feedback from users. So we take a lot of that into consideration as we're designing, as well as all the user testing and iterating and trying to appeal to our users throughout that process. You had a great story about customer experience recently.
Which one? I know we have to wind. I get a lot of the customer service email, like, I can't get my crossword puzzle. Right. Why do you show me the ad over and over and over again? But which one was this? And I know we're going to wrap. We have, are we going to take any questions now? Or are we going to just chat with people? Okay, so we're going to wind it up. I'm going to tell this story quickly, evidently, because I'm garrulous and talk too much. What was the story?
The guy with the e-reader problem.
I won't tell that story. Yeah, I will say that
I thought it was interesting that Scott, he has his job to do, he's busy all day long, but he's reaching out to actual individual customers with problems they have with our products. Yeah. So it's a very sort of customer-focused experience.
Like, if I hear from a customer, if it gets to me, I'm going to write, and I have a phone number or an email address for that person. If they cared enough to write us, I'm going to write them back and try and help them solve their problem, or at least learn what caused the problem. And something like, ugh, in the middle of a busy day, really? But like, and then I stop myself and think how amazing that this person cared enough about us to write and explain their problem. And this week I had 3 of those things. One was the crossword puzzle. We launched a new version of our e-newspaper, and someone couldn't get the correct date, and I forget. Oh, and someone else was like unhappy because they got in the same ad over and over and over again.
But that all plays into the overall designing for a user, designing for a customer. So when I heard that Scott does that on a daily basis, that kind of blew me away, because we do it from a design perspective as far as gathering and acting on feedback, but just to see it from a customer perspective is really great as well. And then one thing that we try to do in keeping those customers is keeping them satisfied with the content on our site. And a big part of that, design plays into that, and keeping them like kind of looped in or locked into, whether it's a mobile app or a website. We work a lot with recirculation concepts, whether it's a user coming to our website to read one article. How do we lock them in and get them to go through and cycle through more articles to read more and learn more from us? And then obviously that plays into advertising revenue and page views and all that. But we use products like Taboola, Scott had mentioned earlier, where we refer related stories or content that's specific to users through customization and personalization, which is the goal we're sort of heading to. We've said it a lot recently, the article page is the new homepage. We're finding a lot of our users are actually coming to our site or to our products through article pages, not necessarily through our fronts. So we want to grab them and lock them in through those article pages to kind of keep them in place.
All right, you're lovely. We've talked too much, but do you have questions?
Hi. So I have a 1.5 question. So the carousel is cool, the big modules, very cool. But as a user or a customer that likes to visit news pages at their homepage and like get a glimpse of everything that's important or that's happening right at the moment, what happened with the top 5 highlights, or how do you tackle breaking news? Or yeah, I mean,
Question.
and just the little snippets or excerpts or of news below the headlines, something like that.
Sorry, I'll just jump in. Sorry. This kind of relates to the question that I asked about how many articles do you publish per day, because it feels that a lot of content could be hidden, or you could miss out on a lot if you don't refresh every 2 hours, basically.
One part of that is how do we handle breaking news, and there's been a lot of that lately. Some of it quite serious, like the Paris bombings. Some of it like Charlie Sheen's news that he has HIV. A little bit silly in the context of the Charlie Sheen story, but also quite sad. Ronda Rousey getting knocked out in Australia in her fight. Like, all 3 of those things happened in a single news weekend for us. And each of those things is important to different parts of our audience and sometimes to the same people. So like, how do we balance all of that and how do we communicate? One thing we do is we send a lot of push alerts. And our strategy is as soon as we know we can be accurate, we send a push alert even before we've developed any content. So for the people who are using our native applications, the first thing they get is a push alert on their phone. As that story develops, that push alert links to a story within the native applications. And on our desktop website, we have banners across the top that allow us to highlight developing or breaking stories, and as that develops, we push that into the top. So we're making some news judgment stories about what to program where. So it is absolutely the case when we publish hundreds of things a day, many people may not care about a bunch of that stuff, so we're making judgments, which comes back to your question about personalization. One of the things that we need to balance is, one, we don't want to be an echo chamber where people's preferences preclude us from delivering what we also think is important news. So there will always be an editorial judgment component in how we service that. There will always, to your question, be things that people miss. We think that that our customers make choices, and we try and present on each of those home screens in the relevant sections a kind of balance of stuff throughout the day. We try and do the same thing through our social channels, which is where some people kind of start their relationship with us each day. So it's a balancing act, and there is sort of no formula that allows us to get it right. What validates our choices for us over the course of a weekend like the Paris, Charlie Sheen, and Ronda Rousey weekend is how many people visit us and how many page views we've done and how much time people have spent with us. And if you have ideas about how we could do it better, I would certainly love to hear from you later.
How do you survive? How do you navigate these waters?
All right.
Because many of us work with really huge corporations,
Yeah.
including some companies from the US, and you often come to a ceiling in regards to how much you can penetrate the organization and change their opinion about what needs to get done for the user.
Big part of the consistent brand throughout all this universal experience is, like I mentioned earlier, the UI transition guy that we hired to create this sort of family or a suite of animations throughout all of our products, which becomes a brand element in itself. So that's one element of keeping that brand consistency. I guess it's a little hard to kind of talk about the paper side of it, the newspaper versus the digital products. But in the digital products, that universal approach, the whole idea behind that, like the consistency element of that, was to maintain that brand presence in every product. Other than that, I mean, it's the visual storytelling, it's the logos, the typography, the colors, all those things are consistent throughout all of our products to give that brand presence. And that's pretty much the approach we took, is how to manage that brand across all platforms, is just keep everything consistent and the same. Currently, we're all over the place. If you look at our products now, comparing iPad to iPhone to Android, it's all over the place. There's different logos, there's different navigation structures. All of these things that can become brand elements to represent USA Today are different in all these different places. So that was a big part of the decision to kind of go for this universal experience to become that brand element.
Which is not to say that it's easy and it's not messy and there's not tension at times, particularly when people want to try new and different things. And so sometimes an idea to do something new starts at the executive level of the company, and depending on who that executive is, if they have purview over their resources, chances are it will at least get done enough that other people can see it and comment on it. Sometimes they just can force it through the organization. When we work with agency partners, we try to be a good client, and part of being a good client is identifying early on in the process what the sort of decision and approval path looks like. Sometimes the notion to change something, even when we're well along the product path, like the carousel design, where square versus portrait, is something that evolves organically and very quickly. And in that case, the chief product officer, who has been really passionate about making some UX changes, walked by, came to see the editor-in-chief and me and said, "I want to try this thing. Are you okay with it?" And we said, yes. But then it fell to Eamonn and his team to make sure that we were executing in a way that actually served our customers, because if it didn't, it was an idea and that we would just have to abandon. If people didn't know they had to swipe left to right, or if it wouldn't work for advertising, then we shouldn't have done it. And in this case, things worked and didn't. But it's very much a, it's just a moving target, week to week and day to day. Fortunately, I'm in a position where I can make many choices on behalf of USA Today. But when you're creating something that's servicing 100 products and 100 different businesses, what works for you may not work for someone else, so you can't always have your way. And that's certainly another part of it. And I don't think we're alone in that. I saw someone present a few weeks ago who works at Hearst, and they're tackling similar challenges on behalf of all of their magazine titles. And those things are like, super visual brands. So we're all balancing kind of being innovative, trying to move the ball forward, servicing our customers, while at the same time trying to be really smart about our businesses.
You decided to use the hamburger menu in the upper left, which has been controversial, especially in the news business. Why did you decide to use it?
We decided to use, it's actually, the hamburger menu we use is a little different than the standard 3-line, exact same width and everything. But we decided to use that to kind of play into each convention on the different platforms, to have sort of, to go back to the universal experience, but have a consistent approach to our navigation throughout all platforms. So the hamburger seemed to be consistent across Android and iOS and Windows, to be an element that users recognized as navigation. And we tested on all those platforms, and I'd say about like 90% of the users immediately knew what that was. And if they didn't, it was something that was easily discoverable for them. They knew to tap on that to see something, whether it was main level navigation or settings. It was something that they discovered very quickly. So it wasn't a deterrent for us to use the hamburger. I know probably like 4 years ago, when we initially designed our iPad app, users didn't know what that was, and we had to put the word menu next to it, which seems to defeat the purpose of an icon. But it worked. That helped users back then to understand that this is a navigation system behind this icon. But more recently, we've seen that users completely understand it, they get it. It's not necessarily something that they don't understand anymore. It's become so conventional, I think, so.
Hi, guys. My name is Daur. Thanks for having me here. Scott, you mentioned Taboola as an advertising platform. How does it work? Do advertisers invest in it? Because I found it on some other news portals. It's a little bit clickbaity, spammy. Yeah. How does it work, and do advertisers like that, and do they invest in that?
Taboola and Outbrain are two kind of network content promotion businesses. Basically, advertisers and other media companies buy placements in many publishers and other sites around the world program these modules that are sometimes labeled around the web, and then if you look sort of carefully in the corner, you'll see brought to you by Taboola or brought to you by Outbrain, and it's a CPC model, and by all accounts, these companies are very, very successful financially on their own. Publishing companies like ours choose to integrate the modules because it's an additional revenue source for us, and it can be quite healthy. It's really important to us that the modules where this content appears are clearly labeled so that our customers don't confuse this content with our content. That's one. Two, we watch what's flowing into it, because occasionally it's just a really bad fit, and we have the ability in their tools to block certain kinds of advertisers. Taboola deploys a kind of a variety of modules and units that they make available to publishers to incorporate their stuff, one of which is this elevator thing, which we tested on some of our sites just recently. I didn't like it from the beginning for the reason that I described, sort of just taking up real estate, and we've discovered that other implementations perform better for us, so we're not going to do it. So we like the revenue. They have sort of, we like the revenue. Labeling is really important, doing it in a way that feels organic to the page and maintains the sort of right hierarchy between the stuff that our customers have come to our pages to see, while also offering them other things which they may be interested in. And the same Taboola modules also surface our content, so they serve as one component of our organic recirculation. We have other units that we produce and serve ourselves, which are the most successful version of that is actually personalized. So we do that as well on some of our pages. Does that answer your question? Great.
So you talked a lot about users, and I'm interested in how does all your front-end stuff ties in with the editorial stuff, and how it works in the CMS and the back-end, how does it affect? And does the same design team who works on the front-end works on the CMS as well?
So yeah, we have a senior designer who's pretty much embedded with the content management team, CMS, we call it Presto. So we have a designer on that team who designs the interface of that back-end content management system. As far as tying in from back-end to front-end, our Presto system populates all of our platforms, so desktop, tablet, phone. I mean, there's often requests for our content management system to have a new feature or a new something added to it. It's quite a challenge for us to keep up with that and get that in the workflow of our content management system team. But our designer, typically, he's designing for our users who are actually our client or our editorial staff. So it's easy for him to reach out and get an understanding of what they want, what they need, how they work in the system. So there's a lot of almost user research that goes into that ahead of time, so that when he designs it and they build it, it's something that they can use functionally on a day-to-day basis.